Hello, everyone. My name is Krina Milosevic, and I'm a professor in the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University. I'm also the academic coordinator of the War in Ukraine Observatory. For our War Observatory project, we are conducting interviews with experts on various perspectives related to the war in Ukraine. And just to mention that the main intent of these interviews is to be used as teaching material and, of course, in the public debate. And today I have the pleasure of having here with me Dr. Yevgeniya Gaber, who is a Ukrainian foreign policy expert and a non-resident senior fellow at the Center in Modern Turkish Studies at Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Carleton University, as well as a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Prior to this, Yevgeniya worked as a foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine until 2021, as a deputy director of the Diplomatic Academy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine between 2018 and 2020, as the second secretary in political affairs in the Embassy of Ukraine in Ankara between 2014 and 2018, and as an assistant professor at the International Relations Department of Odessa National Mechnikov University, where she taught courses on Turkish studies between 2009 and 2014. Yevgeniya holds an MA in International Relations from the same university and a PhD in Political Science from Kiev National Taras Shevchenko University, and has got a professional education in the Netherlands Institute of International Relations, Klingendahl, and Center on Public Diplomacy at the Annenberg School, University of Southern California. Yevgeniya is widely published and has given lectures on related topics for different institutes and universities around the world. So thank you for being with us today. We'll start with some basic questions. And the first question I would ask is, what are, in your opinion, some of the external developments that led to the war in Ukraine?
Hi, Karina. Thank you for having me here. I think it's really important to get some first-hand knowledge from Ukraine on what is going on here. Of course, I'll touch upon several things, several developments from outside the Ukraine, which actually has made this war of aggression possible. But I think the first thing to emphasize is that the actual reasons for that war are inside Russia itself, and they're very close connected to the current Putin's regime. Because very often one of the most widely spread narratives of the Russian propaganda is that Ukraine doesn't have any agency in foreign relations, in international relations, and that it's very often used either as a puppet of the West, or its foreign policy has been completely shaped by some foreign actors. And these are mostly the external developments that have led to the war in Ukraine. So my first point would be that to understand the reasons for that, we have to look at the rationale inside Russia itself. It has never seen Ukraine as a separate state, especially with the Putin's regime, and especially starting from the Munich speech of 2007. It has been obvious that he is up to a very revisionist view of the world order, saying that Russia's interests have to be taken into account. And obviously one of those interests would include not having Ukraine as a separate state, and not having Ukraine a nation as a nation with distinct cultural, even civilizational, domestic and foreign policy identities and priorities. So for that reason, it has started far before the first occupation and aggression in 2014 and before 2022. If you look at the history of the Russian Empire and of Ukraine, it is full of different acts of genocide against Ukrainians and against the Crimean Tatars, for example, and any ethnic groups living in Ukraine, and actually distincting themselves from Russians, saying that we are not part of this great Russia, or great Russian Empire. And the same goes for Tsar decrees on abandoning and actually on banning Ukrainian language, Ukrainian literature and books, and then into the period of the Soviet Union with Holodomors, these famine episodes, killing and starving to death millions of Ukrainians, and then deportation again of Crimean Tatars. So it's all a long history there, which shows us the general stance on Ukraine, which has always been a problem for Russia as existing very distinct state and Ukrainian nation. This is the core reason, I would say. Well, with this being said, obviously we have to talk also about the external developments which have made it possible. And I would say that unfortunately, there has been a huge miscalculation and misreading of Russian foreign policy objectives for many years. So starting from, for example, 2007, right, this Munich speech that I've mentioned, and then into the occupation of 1/5 of the Georgian territory, the Tsinvali region, which is often referred to as the Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and then with the 2014 occupation of Crimea and the eastern regions of Ukraine, and then also 2015 Syria and actual intervention of Russia into Syria, which has got very, very little reaction from many Western countries and from the international community. Unfortunately, because there has been this naive expectation that appeasement policy will work, that Russia has to be tolerated, and not Russia actually, but Putin's regime has to be tolerated, and that there is still a space for negotiations and a space for talks with the aggressive state. So because there has been no reaction and not a sanctions regime in a way that Ukraine would expect it to happen, and because unfortunately this blackmailing of Russia continued for quite a long period of time, in 2022 the Russian Federation had both material and financial capacities as well as military capacities to launch this aggression against Ukraine, and also this belief that the West is not united, that there will be not strong response from the Western countries, NATO and the European Union, and that Ukrainians will be weak enough to give a response to this act of aggression, which, as we can see, has never happened and has played out in quite an opposite way.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, I think you outline important aspects, and I'm glad to hear that you focused on the internal, developments that took place that led to such aggression against Ukraine. So I would continue by asking, what do you think triggered the aggression against Ukraine when it was triggered in 2014 with the taking over of Crimea from Ukraine?
Obviously, the Maidan, the Euromaidan in Ukraine, would be named by most of experts as a trigger for that aggression. Maybe not the reason, but trigger. Because again, what happens in Ukraine and around Ukraine is very much connected to the internal developments in Russia. And this, let's say, soft power of Ukraine, providing an example of a post-Soviet state, which has gone a quite complicated way from a post-Soviet republic to a modern European state, democratic, liberal state, with, I would say, quite a lot of problems still, of course, with all different problems rooted in this post-Soviet legacy, like corruption, like sometimes mismanagement, but still we actually achieved quite high standards of life, democratic successes in democratic reforms. And this is in itself a threat to the current Putin's Russia. Because when you have a country like Ukraine on your borders, and Ukraine has always been seen and regarded as a soft underbelly of Russia, but also as the country which has most connections to Russia, and which is quite similar to Russia in the ways it developed in terms of Ukrainian and Russian nations, connectivities, and so on. So you can see how almost, let's say, the same country, which has much fewer resources than Russia has, because we don't have gas and oil reserves, but still it has achieved successes in economic development, in again, relations with the Western partners, European Union, NATO, and also in this multi-national, multi-ethnic liberal society, which has a place in the space for different ethnic, religious, and cultural groups. And when you compare it to the Russian Federation, which has nothing to do with the actual federation, with the exception of the name, because the indigenous people and different ethnic groups in Russia, they have absolutely no rights whatsoever in their cultural development, in their in how they allocate their budget, in how they even develop their educational systems and their basic needs on the local level. So you can see this huge gap in development. And of course, I don't mention all different aspects like healthcare, like general image and this power of attraction in Ukraine. And that's a threat for Russia in itself, because what Russia has is weapons of mass destruction, but not weapons of mass attraction, which is quite important in the 21st century. So using this false pretext of the kind of illegitimate government in Ukraine after 2014, and after the ousting of the president Yanukovych, which actually who had a Russian passport, and Russian FSB agents were in many political establishment circles, and in military, and in different parts of Ukraine, including in Crimea, that gave a perfect chance to use this vulnerability of Ukraine to invade Ukraine while it was still weak. So then, of course, back in 2014, Ukraine could not react when Crimea was occupied and illegally annexed, and then when the eastern regions of Ukraine were invaded, because we did not have any military capacity to do so. And again, this desire of Ukrainian people to join the European Union and to join NATO, which also triggered Russian reaction and Russian desire to invade Ukraine, to overtake the capital city and the government, and not physically like it happened in 2022, but in terms of control over Ukraine's domestic and foreign policy. This has all led to a situation when we ended up in 2014, 2015, having large parts of our territories occupied by the Russian forces, and actually Ukrainian then government of President Poroshenko being questioned for its legitimacy. So the main reason of this invasion in 2022, and when actually Russia failed to get the same success as it had in 2014, is of course a huge progress that we have made during these 8 years, also with the help of our Western partners, in the way how we reformed our armed forces, how we has shaped our national identity and had these national building processes as well as state building processes, and how we consolidated both society inside Ukraine and Western support of our partners on the international arena.
Thank you. So if it is to summarize, it was the force of attraction of the West and its values that represented the threat for Russia on its borders. Yes, thank you. That's a very good point that I think we should think a bit more about it in our debates.